then lo and behold, what happens? Second order principle number 2 says, well, we've got to go back because these interests are more vital. They're more fundamental, right? Then humans need to have cheap, whatever, toilet paper. Anyway, all right, so the way we resolve this old growth forest quandary is we consider the fact that yes, human needs are very important, and we have obligations to our human communities. But in this case, the needs of the biotic community are going to take precedence because they're vital needs of the biotic community. Okay, and they're probably non-vital needs. Now, in some situations, you might encounter where human vital needs are really at stake, and in those situations, then second order principle number 1 is going to tell us that okay, we've got to bite the bullet, right? And environmentalists are going to be sad, but we have to sacrifice certain things, perhaps, right? Anyway, all right. So Collicutt offers us an ecocentrist explanation for why it's morally wrong to exploit biotic communities in ways that conflict with their capacities to repair and renew their integrity, stability, and beauty. It's morally wrong for simple consequentialist ecological reasons, to destroy an ecosystem's capacities for self-renewal. All right, so any disruption of an ecosystem that destroys its capacity for self-renewal is on the face of it land ethically wrong, okay? There may be exceptional circumstances like I was just alluding to. It may sometimes be okay to disrupt ecosystems at a pace or on a scale which destroys that ecosystem's capacities for self-renewal. Right, that's one implication of Collicutt's interpretation. He says, yeah, there may be some exceptional circumstances where human vital needs are going to justify the destruction of an ecosystem. All right, I'm not sure exactly, how Collicutt would, under what conditions that would be the case, but. I think I throw out a couple possible examples, maybe. I don't know how good they are on the next page. All right, so where human needs are vital, they take precedence over the vital needs of biotic communities. Vital needs of the biotic community take precedence over non-vital human needs, however. And of course, let's just be candid, all right? We don't need any of these dams. We really don't. There's nothing in our vital being, there's nothing essential that we need, right? Nothing at all that we get by damming the river. We could live just as comfortably as we do now if none of those dams existed, all right? So most of the time, this framework is going to be more than adequate to justify the tree hugger's position at the hearing, at the hearing over the Tesoro Savage oil terminal or something like that. We just don't need to be doing. We don't need to be sending 150 oil cars down the damn Columbia Gorge every day. We just don't need to do that, right? Does anybody disagree with that? That seems insane to say that you need to do that. So it's a very simple case that Collicutt would make, for example, and Leopold would make. If you go to the public hearings, which I encourage all of you to do. We're going to probably have quite a few public hearings on this Tesoro Savage oil terminal in Vancouver, over there across the river. Anyway, it'd be shocking, you think, wow, man, we have a really environmentally friendly community up here in Portland, and we really care about our natural resources. And to me, just the idea that oil terminal would be approved, we'll keep our eyes on that, okay? I mean, all of you, keep your eyes on that. It's going to go on for a while before we finally figure out. But the projection is that 42% of the oil that they were going to send through the Keystone XL, the new Keystone XL pipeline that finally got canceled, right? But 42% of that oil that they were going to send through Keystone XL is going to now go on trains from the Bakken oil fields in North Dakota by trains all the way across the Columbia Plateau and then down the Columbia Gorge. Isn't that disgusting? And then they'll put it on oil tankers in Vancouver, right? And those oil tankers will then go down. It's another 100 miles or so, isn't it? 50, 60, 80 miles from Portland to the ocean. So there'll be those big giant oil tankers going right past our harbor here. And where do you suppose that oil is going to go? We used to have, until very recently, we prohibited exports of crude oil, right? Seems to make sense, right? But, to not allow giant transnational corporations to dig up valuable minerals under our land, and then make a huge profit by selling them in China or India, right? So that, obviously, an intelligent country would not allow that to happen, right? But lo and behold, just a few weeks ago, Congress lifted the ban on crude oil exports. So the plan, obviously, is to use our river and our resources and our waterways and our salmon runs and all of our beautiful stuff to transport their filthy product and their filthy business model from North Dakota all the way through our land, our water, all the way to the ocean, and then make $1 billion by selling it in China. And if we let them do that, then we're kind of a pathetic bunch. Maybe we are. Anyway, all right, we'll see what happens. So it's up to, I guess, ultimately, what's his name? The governor, Inslee, Jay Inslee, with the reputation as a Seattle liberal. So we'll see. We'll see exactly, what this guy's all about. All right. So enough of that. So here are some, I think this is where I got some examples. So usually Culligan argues applying these second order principles, right, and balancing them out with the big first order principle, usually our duties to biotic communities take precedence because the interests of the biotic community are usually much stronger than the whatever interest we're trying to satisfy, right, through building an oil terminal or whatever. But sometimes, perhaps, our duties to humans and the human economy take precedence over our duties to biotic communities. In that case, we apply second order principle number one. I mean, that would be the result of applying second order principle number one and then looking to see if maybe second order principle number two is going to override, right? So I don't know. I'm a little resentful of ranchers, for example, and the way that they want to shoot wolves, but I'm willing to listen, The rancher's livelihood or the wolf ecosystem. Macaw whaling, that's a totally different kind of example, of course, because they're only harvesting one or two whales per year. And it seems to be totally consistent with sustainable management. So some people object because whales are unusually sophisticated and sensitive animals. So that would be an animal rights argument, right? We haven't gotten there yet. So we're still just stuck in Leopoldian ethics. All right, you've got my Taiji Cove example up there too. Those fishermen, they call themselves traditional fishermen. You got to wonder about their taxonomical skills. They identify a dolphin as a fish, but anyway, I get upset about what they do. But who knows? I mean, maybe second order principle number one takes us to our obligations. They insist that this has been going on for hundreds of years. It's their traditional economy. So, in the event, just something to think about, and you might wonder whether or not these principles always end up supporting an environmentalist, resource protectionist point of view. Because if they do, then, every time we apply them, if the environmentalists end up prevailing, then, what really, are they really fair? Are they really good? Is that a good way to mediate our disputes? I don't know. All right. So land ethic, resource management practices that are obviously land ethically wrong. The big story is anthropogenic global climate destabilization. It's very easy to explain why destabilizing Earth's climates systems is more land ethically wrong. All right? But it doesn't mean that all obviously, there is a fine point to be made. Collicutt concedes that human exploitation of the natural world, all the things that many environmentalists complain about, are biologically unique but not unnatural. Okay? Industrial fossil fuel extraction and consumption are nevertheless land ethically wrong because of the scale on which they are taking place. And that's really what it all comes down to. Harvesting natural resources is never land ethically wrong all by itself. It all depends on whether or not that harvest is consistent with the long-term viability of the biotic community. Okay? And many of our harvests are. So, and Leopold, remember, is a hunter and a fisherman. So let's not, start mischaracterizing our environmental ethicists. Okay, but more specifically, we can analyze half of these dams on the Snake and Columbia River as being land ethically wrong. Dams destroy fisheries, we know, by destroying the spawning, rearing, and migratory habitats of salmon. Leopold sometimes talks about, in his own amateurish kind of way, law of diminishing returns. And what he always seems to be getting at when he mentions this is that in the course of managing a natural resource, we tend to gain only up to a certain point. The wealth that we gain out of resource extraction ends up being undermined by the losses suffered by the land at some point, right? And so at some point the losses, which are also economic losses to the land, to the ecosystem, outweigh the economic benefits that we might get, for example, by building more dams, okay? So I tend to identify all the post-1950 dams. Basically, that's where we reached the law of diminishing returns when it came to harvesting the electric power of falling water, right, which is what we do with those hydropower dams, right? We already had about half the dams in the system were already in place by 1950. And at that point, what I'm saying is that we reached an optimal balance between production of electricity and the river's natural production of salmon, right? The river produces kilowatts as we've adapted it through dams, right? And the river also produces salmon. And optimally, we want to manage the river in a way that produces the maximum combination of those two, right? But the more dams, as we started building too many dams, the impact on the salmon runs was so huge they just crashed completely, right? And we lost all that value in our river. We lost all that wealth in our river. So, and that's what Leopold characterizes as the law of diminishing returns. Okay? I think maybe I clarified that a little more. All right, it seems like we always spend a little time with Darwin in each class. And there's a reason for that, because Darwin is really just indispensable to the emergence of this ecological understanding of humankind, right? That gets picked up on after Darwin. Darwin's gone, I think, by the 1870s. Did most of his important work in the 1840s and 1850s, I think. And then in the early 1900s. And then there are some kind of early ecologists. I think, who was it, coined the term ecology in the 1870s, I think. That's mentioned somewhere in what you guys read. Anyway, and then Charles Elton, I believe, is the guy who kind of organizes and systematizes the science of ecology in the 1920s. And these guys are all Darwinists, right? They're all heavily indebted to Darwin. And Leopold was a great admirer of Charles Elton, who was a great pioneer, early ecologist. So they all rely on Darwin. They're all heavily indebted to Darwin. Darwin is the guy that kind of sets our culture on this new orientation toward humankind, right? This new biological, evolutionary, ecological approach to the human animal. So Leopold and Collicutt are both heavily indebted to Darwin, as are other thinkers that we study throughout the term. Evolutionary biosocial account of the origins of moral relations among humans. And just to recapitulate that account, Darwin's account, human beings are of necessity social animals. Survival depends on cooperation. Human life is more comfortably and enjoyably lived collectively and cooperatively than singly and competitively. So, over the course of a lot of human evolution, altruistic, parental, and filial affections get extended out to beyond kinship relationships, all right? Because it was evolutionary advantageous for these altruistic affections to extend beyond kinship relationships to clan and tribe relationships, and then they extended outward again to the point now where in a global world, a global society, pretty much except a few, outlying communities understand that all humans have obligations to one another, the whole human community. So let's take an early break because we're going to get into human moral psychology next. And this is the next two competing explanations of morality, all right? And that's what we're going to get into after our break. And this one we're focusing on now. Hume thinks of moral reasoning in terms of a moral psychology. Kant thinks of moral reasoning in terms of a metaphysic. All right? So Hume's great contribution to Enlightenment moral philosophy is what he calls moral psychology, all right, where he goes on all this stuff about sentiments. Kant, responding to Hume some 20 or 30 years later, offers us an account of moral reasoning as a metaphysical problem. It has these metaphysical components that take us way beyond psychology, all right? And so Kant's great contribution to moral reasoning, the title of his little book that you'll all read if you take another ethics class, is Introduction or Prolegomena to a Metaphysics of Morals. Introduction to the Metaphysics of Morals is Kant's great book. And it's a short little book, Introduction to the Metaphysics of Morals, and that gives you his the narrative, okay, if I can use that kind of loose, slippery word, the narrative that accounts for moral reasoning. It's very different kind of a story than the narrative that we're about to get when we come back from our break from David Hume. All right? So let's come back at about 2 minutes to 1. All right? That gives us 5 minutes. I'll get this attendance sheet going around if I remember.
When do you think you'll finish grading the?
Oh, I'll get them back to you on Tuesday.
Okay.
That's my routine. I get all my grading done over the weekend. And keep plugging along, you know. Get the locomotive, keep the train running on time. Yeah, well, yeah, I was going to add another guy that I mentioned over here. We could include. And we could include. Pope Francis. All right. These, of course, would be NLTs.
And yeah, if you can post a video of the lecture containing this, I should be able to have it on Tuesday. Or would you like to email it to
Well, you know, the videos don't show the board very well at all.
you? Right, but at least I'll be able to listen along.
Yeah, I'll upload the video today.
Okay.
Or tomorrow, maybe. I'll probably today.
What's the E in the top right corner?
This here?
Yeah.
Egoism. We got to acknowledge them as we go along, even though we don't spend any time with them. Egoism is a viable normative theory. It's viable in the sense that it's coherent and hangs together. It's kind of lazy, but you know, you can't just throw them out. We've got to be honest. You know, philosophers can't say, "Oh, you guys are illegitimate," because they're not illegitimate. They have actually a cogent point of view that hangs together about what should be the measurement. What is the proper measure of moral value? Right? They just want to say it's all relative, dude. You know, and you just got to ask yourself, what is it to you? What do you really want? You know, is your deepest desire to go, you know, conquering the world? Then go do that. Right? That's what's morally right. Is your deepest desire to make a good impression on your Boy Scout troop? Then go do that. You know what I mean? It's all totally relative. But it's an explanation of morality. It's very simple, but it fits together. You know what I mean? So I always include it in there. I always say a little bit about both nihilism and egoism, and also relativism on the first day of class. And obviously they can't appear anywhere else, right? Because I mean, only a human being has enough. The nihilist just says all moral judgments are equally valid. The egoist says the moral judgment that is most valid is the one that is most consistent with my deepest desires. Right? The egoist just says, well, so usually egoists are also nihilists, actually, they go together, and they're also relativists. All right, and remember, okay, so remember I told you guys, though, practically speaking, there are really three important axiological orientations that matter, right? And this is one right here. I'm sorry, it's awkward the way I have. I want to keep them in this order. Before I used to have the holistic anthros were over here, I think. And anyway, but I like it flows better this way. So, but one result of charting these like this is that it's not quite obvious, but if you're, you know, it's pretty hard to be an anthropocentrist without being some kind of holist too, as well as an individualist. So that's, you know, in terms of practically speaking, the different kind of camps that the environmentalists, animal rights, and humanists find themselves in. This is the humanist camp, right? And then this is the animal rights camp. All right. Humanist camp is camp number 1. Okay. Because we're number 1, right? Humans are number 1. And then animals are number 2. This is the animal rights camp, or we'll just call it the animal welfare camp. And they're number 2. And then number 3 are the radical enviros, right? They're always last because they're a bunch of hippie freaks, right? So they're last. All right. And we'll just call these the. So these are the humanists. These are the animal welfareists, and these are the ecocentrists. And they're number 3. Okay? Oops, I meant to be red and orange. Oh, well. Anyway, just keep that in mind. You don't want to put that on my. But anyone wants to do, don't put that on your extra credit project. It's just another way of thinking how putting all these different pieces together. All right. I've been rereading Milstein's essay, and I really like it. And I was struggling when I was putting together the syllabus to. I almost had Ernest Partridge's classic essay in there after Collicutt, but and I make some reference to some of the points that Partridge makes in the lecture notes that are coming up. I borrow a little bit from Partridge to help to highlight some of the deficiencies in Collicutt's argument, and Collicutt's reconstruction of the land ethic. But Milstein's point is that, well, let's just wait on that. All right, Humean moral psychology is an essential, is the essential part of David Hume and Adam Smith's portrayal of moral reasoning. And let me get this appendix sheet going around here. Maybe what we'll do is we'll start on this side and have it just go all the way to the very back. And then when it gets back, what's your name? Marissa? Marissa Rison? When it gets all the way back to here, then let it go across so that it comes back forward this way, all right? Let's try to do it that way today. All right, so moral reasoning according to David Hume's account. This is all going to be very, hopefully it's very simple, but how, anyway, I hope this all ties together for you guys. So David Hume insists that moral reasoning proceeds through emotions. It's not like it happens and then we get an emotion. That's not what he's saying. Yes, I want to put this. Moral reasoning proceeds through emotions, or, we'll use the words passion, emotion, sentiment, all interchangeably. All right? So this is a very important point, though. Moral reasoning won't happen. It won't happen at all. We won't think morally. We won't be able to reach conclusions. We won't be able to go anywhere at all without sentiment. All right? A moral judgment is empty and meaningless unless it has a motivational aspect. The motivational aspect is necessarily emotive. All right? So think emotivational aspect. But it's not like we can separate out the motivational aspect from the feeling either, or from the content even of the judgment. The judgment that is morally wrong has a necessarily inextricable sentimental component to it. It's a feeling. At bottom, at the very foundation of a moral judgment is a feeling, okay, according to David Hume. Rational thinking alone, reason alone, does not motivate anyone to do anything. And this is really the devastating criticism of reason that Kant took so much umbrage at and worked so hard to repudiate. Some 20, 30 years later. Kant says that David Hume awakened him from his dogmatic slumbers. Gives a great deal of credit to Hume, but ends up completely rejecting his account of moral reasoning, and his account of reasoning in general, his epistemology as well as his ethics. Reason alone does not provide, according to David Hume, does not provide or disclose a sense of obligation binding the reasoner to follow or abstain from any particular course of action. Only passion or sentiment can give a person a binding sense of obligation. So Hume concludes, or famously states, that reason is a slave of the passions. In other words, moral reasoning is a servant of moral sentiments. Right? Moral reasoning consists of these proto-moral sentiments, is one way of characterizing them. Hume's central point is not simply that moral judgments need a motivational aspect and emotive aspect. His argument is much deeper and more subtle than this. His argument is that moral judgments do not and cannot take shape without sentiments. Sentiments comprise the coordinates, right? The coordinates of our moral compass are sentiments and substantive content of moral reasoning. Moral reasoning could not proceed at all without coordinates and substance provided by feelings. All right? So here are some quotes and a little bit from Adam Smith. Hume writes that morality is determined by sentiment. It defines virtue to be, virtue is whatever mental action or quality gives to a spectator the pleasing sentiment of approbation, and vice the contrary. Okay? Adam Smith said, how selfish soever man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortunes of others, and render their happiness necessary to him. Of this kind is pity or compassion, the emotion we feel for the misery of others when we either see it or are made to conceive it in a very lively manner. That's cute, isn't it? Some of these old school guys, these cute little turns of phrases. Adam Smith is really a pleasure to read. Adam Smith is today remembered largely for his work in economics. But Adam Smith was first and always will be first and foremost an ethicist, a moral philosopher. And his contributions to economics actually are grossly distorted by people who have not read his other work.
Wealth of Nations, right?
The Wealth of Nations is kind of an inspiration for a lot of self-described neo-libertarians. But that's a very... The Wealth of Nations is where we get this term, the invisible hand of the market, right? And it's a really misleading kind of analysis of the... Anyway, you really need to read his other important work in moral philosophy to understand what he was trying to say in the Wealth of Nations. But what these guys are basically saying, all right, what the Scottish Enlightenment thinkers are saying, and their great contribution to philosophy is that humankind is endowed with, just naturally endowed with an order of emotions that that somehow just automatic, and it's kind of a, who knows, it's kind of a bizarre theory. It makes sense in a way though. We are naturally endowed with sympathy, right? And there is sort of an order of sentiment that all persons are naturally endowed with. And this is what lends support and justification to our moral judgments, all right? The fact that our moral judgments are undergirded by this kind of universal sentiment, all right? Kant says morality is undergirded by universal reason. The Scottish Enlightenment thinkers Hume and Smith say that morality is undergirded by universal sentiments governed by regular rules, right? And so if we can understand and identify those regular rules among sentiments, then we can explain why a certain normative claim has the force that it has, right? Has the meaning that it has, right? Then we can explain why you ought not to do this, right? Because it elicits sentiments in others that are of a morally disapproving kind, right? Anyway, you see, I hope this should be fairly easy to you, all right? This basic point that the Scottish Enlightenment thinkers are making. That we can often derive sorrow from the sorrow of others, right? You walk down the street, he uses this as an example to confirm his theory. You're walking down the street and a perfect stranger is standing on the corner of the street, just sobbing, just crying horribly. Immediately, even though you're half a block away, you hear the sound of the crying and you see the face and your heart just feels bad, right? Smith calls that fellow feeling. He uses this phrase, fellow feeling, and he thinks this is a natural endowment that we all have. All right? And then Hume gets much more kind of systematic with this theory though, and he identifies key moral sentiments. You could also describe these as super sentiments that are kind of the parents of all other sentiments. All right? And the super sentiments related to, okay, the super sentiments that nurture all the other positive moral sentiments are benevolence and sympathy, okay? And all these other sentiments are subspecies of benevolence and sympathy: generosity, love, friendship, esteem, compassion, gratitude. And then the negative moral super sentiments are guilt and shame, okay? So what these thinkers are arguing is that whenever we morally approve somebody's action or somebody's character, what we are saying is that they are exhibiting, what we are saying is that their actions and characters elicit positive sentiments in us, right? Sentiments of we feel good, right? Whereas if what they're doing is bad, right, they steal from their sister or something like that, then we feel negative sentiments toward them, and they themselves feel those negative sentiments of guilt and shame, all right? So now this is jumping ahead just a little bit here at the bottom of the page here, but this, I referred to this guy earlier named Ernest Partridge, whose essay I almost assigned you to read. I think Milstein's essay is a little bit more accessible, a little bit easier. So, and I really like Milstein's essay a lot. So you're reading that instead. But we could have read Partridge, and this is what Partridge would have said in response to Collicutt. Partridge argues that Humean moral sentiments presuppose personhood and agency in the entity they are directed toward. So Partridge argues that Humean moral sentiments cannot support direct moral concern for non-human entities. We'll try to explain that point a little more. The point that Partridge is making is that Humean moral psychology, the deeper point that Partridge is trying to make, is that Humean moral psychology is unavoidably anthropocentric. Okay? And if this criticism, this devastating criticism is true, then all of Collicutt's decades of laborious work reinterpreting, reinterpolating Leopold's land ethic was off track. And in fact, the notion that we can construct a more than anthropocentric environmental ethic out of Humean moral psychology is just fundamentally misguided. Because Humean moral psychology, number one, presupposes personhood. At minimum, morality presupposes a person, a sentient being who cares about what happens to her or him. The adjective moral must have, lurking at least somewhere in its context of application, some deliberative agent or community of agents. Moral implies responsibility, accountability, praise, and blame. A moral judgment is a judgment which reflects upon the worth of a person. Right? And now you're going to kind of encounter another one of these big